it's about to get real crowded here on the stage. We're going to even scooch over and make room for a whole bunch of experts. And this is actually a talk that I know we've all been really looking forward to. It's one of the two panels that we have today. And so we're going to start bringing in, I think everybody's here.
Are you working on adding you all?
Hey, hi, Rob, I see. Excellent. Hi, Brian. I think I saw Eddie in there somewhere. Manuel, hello. Everybody is here. Okay, cool. And then I think we have an interpreter. Awesome. Okay, great. So this is
to talk about, the building your internal developer platform. And it's real end user case studies. So I will leave you all to do your introductions. I was going to introduce you, but I am sure between Rob, who is our moderator here, you will all have that covered. So we're going to duck out.
And we're going to have a reminder for everybody, put your questions in the panel, and especially this is one of your end user panels. And so these are the folks that are out there breaking it, fixing it, getting their hands dirty. They had the same questions as you at one point, and they're solving these problems. So this is the panel to ask some serious real world day 2 problem questions. So don't be shy in the chat.
Hello, everyone. How's it going this morning? We are short on time with this panel, but we have a lot of wonderful people here to talk about IDP today, one of those hot topics out in the Kubernetes and DevOps world at the moment. So if you don't mind briefly going around and introducing yourself, that would be awesome. And we'll start with Brian.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Phillips. I am an engineer at Shutterstock. I've been there quite a while. If you're not familiar with Shutterstock, we're mid-sized company. We have about 300 people in our engineering staff, and I work on the architecture team and have been kind of the champion for implementing Backstage over the last year. I'll pass it on to Chad.
Hey, everybody. Chad Beaudin, Chief Engineer of the Boeing Software Factory at Boeing. We're building out a centralized software factory for our commercial airlines and our defense side of the house. So a lot of complications there. IDPs are pretty new for us. So we're still learning a lot as we go, and want to give a big shout out for having a bike in the background. Love seeing that. And
go
I'll
next.
go over. Yeah, sorry, Eddie.
No worries. So I'm Eddie Wassef. I'm Chief Architect at Vonage. We're part of Ericsson. We've been on our IDP journey for coming up on 4 or 5 years now. We've learned a lot. We have all the battle scars and the limping to go with it. But we're really happy with what we've got, and we're really excited to see the industry and the just overall community move towards IDPs and Backstage and others as well. So for that, I'll turn it over to Manuel.
Thanks. I think I've been with Adobe for 11 years now, so I've been around for a while. I'm a senior engineering manager as part of the developer platforms team. And we started with containerization back in 2016 or so and built a common runtime for teams back then. And kind of as the IDP story has matured over the last few years, we've tried to stay on top of it and keep up. And I think Portal and all that are a big part of that. And I currently manage the Backstage initiative at Adobe.
Awesome. I realized, though, that I did not introduce myself. So I'm Rob Koch. I work with Slalom Consulting, Slalom Build. I work with software engineering, data engineering. We implement solutions on the cloud. Clients come in, and many of them don't have an IDP or any concept of an IDP. Can one of you maybe explain briefly what IDP is and how, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, if one of you wouldn't mind, I guess we could start with Eddie.
Absolutely. So IDP is one of those 3-letter acronyms that can mean a bunch of things, but in this case, it's an internal developer platform. And so really what it is, it's a place for your engineers and your architects and your program managers and to go and to see the full landscape of your software, your documentation, your contracts, and so on. And it's kind of a central hub for all of your engineering needs. That's the grossly abbreviated version.
Yeah, that's great. No, thank you for that. It's nice that management can see holistic views of what's happening in your environment. So that's a nice way to consolidate that answer. I'll go ahead and start asking Chad here. What's the primary use case that caused your organization to use IDP and implement that? What's valuable for you and your organization with IDP?
Sure. Couple big items on there for us. One is consistency of tools, experience, and process across. We're at about 8,000 software engineers at Boeing. And so we really want to make a consistent experience for them, regardless of who their customers are. We're a little unique in Boeing in that, like, not all of our stuff is, developing products that we're selling to other people. Obviously, that's the case on the commercial airline side, but on the defense side, our customers are the DoD and the different military branches, and so we're developing solutions for them. We want both of those developer groups to have the same experience when they use our tool or use our tool in the Boeing software factory. One of the other big deals that we're really looking for is just ease of discovery of information for our developers across the company. Where are our processes? Where are our best way to do things? What are some common pipelines that we have in place for them, depending on what kind of software they're developing and what language they're developing? So making it easily discoverable, that information is one of our main things from looking into an IDP.
How about you, Manuel? What do you have as far as your experience in your organization with IDPs, and what benefits have you seen?
I think we've seen a lot of acceleration across the board. A big move for Adobe was getting to the cloud, 10 years ago, a little bit more than that. And then a lot of teams had to figure out how to get there quickly. So we were able to kind of say, containers are a path forward. We'll give you a runtime, but you have to stay on this one track. I think some of the things we've learned is that people need some more flexibility over time, and that's been an interesting thing to kind of develop and expand our tool chain to support. But we have seen a lot of velocity with teams, kind of asking them to fit into this box, kind of move your software quickly, and we'll give you the best practices. Don't worry so much about learning everything, running everything yourself. You're accountable for your software, but we're going to try to lift as much as we can for you. So we have seen a lot of velocity across teams, and I think the biggest lesson for us is also, how do we accommodate the unique needs of different products, different just demand of technology that teams have, because some teams just apply a lot of load to the server just in traffic alone or with the amount of processing. So we're trying to commoditize that as much as possible for all teams. So that's the real challenge. And I think experience plus technology are the two things we're trying to up level for our customers, which are internal Adobe developers.
And now with Manuel and Chad, if you would like to talk about the after having heard some of the benefits of those, if you were to talk about the reality of IDP, do you think it's here to stay, or do you think it's a short-term hype and we'll move on to something else? What are your thoughts, Brian?
Yeah, our journey with IDPs is fairly new. We started a POC at Backstage in early 2023 and did a more broad rollout middle of 2023. We've had very good experience. Our primary use case, to kind of go back to the prior question, was a better source of ownership information for software. I think maybe it's a common experience. Once software is deployed to production, it tends to stay there, and it outlives maybe the team's structures that were in place at the time that it was built. And that's been an experience we've had at Shutterstock, where we needed a better place than a Google Sheet to keep track of, okay, who owns this service or that service or this front end, et cetera. And Backstage has really been valuable for that, again, in the short time that we've been using it, less than a year. Also driving standardization for expectations for different coding practices and that sort of thing. We use the Spotify paid plugin bundle and their soundcheck plugin to drive some of those efforts. And then the final thing that we're using it for is that single pane of glass thing. We have a lot of tooling, Jenkins pipelines. We use GitHub Actions for some of our deployment pipelines, SonarQube, New Relic, all sorts of different tools, and bringing those into one place has been really valuable to us, even again with less than a year under our belt. And for all of those reasons, I feel like IDP is bringing a lot to the table, and probably will stick around for a while. There is a lot of hype right now going on, but I don't think it's going to be a flash and move on kind of thing. I think it does have some staying power.
So with people coming in and going within the company, how many folks, that get hired are put on and having to learn the learning curve of the system and the whole ecosystem and what tools you use and how to implement and deploy? Would that have an IDP? Would IDP make that an easier process involved? Eddie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, ultimately, I think an IDP is the ultimate silo buster, right? And it is a place where you can share, the problems that you ran into with certain technologies, so that the next person that comes in that faces it, they initially start and look over there, and they can get over that problem really quickly. It's also a place where you can share efforts, right, and reach across different teams, whether that's different geographies or just even different teams in the same location, and solve things. So it's absolutely for continuously improving continuous efficiency when you have an IDP, especially as that IDP starts getting some momentum. It just pays off dividends. So it's been a really great tool, and I'm really happy to see developers embracing it and the community start working on tools like Backstage and others as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of benefits to be had with IDP from all of your comments here. Most of you seem to use Backstage. Another big one is Port, I believe, for game management. And so what could get us on the IDP platform to get that set up sooner, faster? Who should we partner with or work with in order to coordinate that spinning up of an IDP? So I guess I'll direct that one to Chad.
Yeah, not sure I have the best answer for that one. We started with Backstage, similar to Brian a little while ago, late last year, mostly just because that was like the big name in the game on it. Heard about some of the other offerings out there just as part of the talks that happened before this with Backstack, and I think somebody was talking about maybe Argo had one as well. That's one I'm not familiar with, so I'll have to look into that. So yeah, I don't think I have a great question for you on that one, Rob, but I'll certainly open it up to anybody else if they have a better answer.
Yeah, anyone feel free if you feel free to jump in, go for it.
I can take a stab at this one. I would say Backstage has probably got the most momentum, and if y'all watched the movie Zoolander, know about the meme, Backstage is so hot right now, and so everybody's on it. It has the most plugins, it has the most tools, and I think the industry has accepted that, and even other IDPs are integrating into it and adding more features into Backstage. So it's by far the furthest along. It's not perfect, right? No software is perfect. And I think I mentioned before, it was like wrestling an alligator, getting that thing to go. And so, but with the plugins from Spotify, with the support of Spotify, with the community, with Backstage Con, with Cortex and Red Hat all supporting it and adding plugins, it really is the most valuable and probably the most mature one out there at the moment. And you won't go wrong going with Backstage, I would say.
Yeah, I think I can add a little bit here. When we first did the evaluation of Backstage, we had a bunch of different portals inside the company and a lot of good developers writing micro front ends, and kind of compared that to what we're getting out of the box. And really just the kind of batteries included you get with Backstage, like all the auth is there. The contribution of how plugins work together is solved for. You wouldn't have to figure these things out. So it kind of made sense for us to bring the Backstage in and start moving things to it instead of continuing in this micro front end architecture in a bunch of different places. And I think, as Eddie said, the community is rallying around it. So I just expect a lot of velocity there in the next year. Like I've seen a lot the past 6 months already. I expect it to get more mature and grow there. And hopefully we can contribute to that too. We have a couple of things we want to open source at some point.
Yeah, I mean, and it is, I have to agree with you. It is very much being improved tremendously with every release. And a lot of the releases are breaking, right? And so, there was no authentication or permissions, and there were permissions, and then there was no way to add users, and there wasn't. And so that's a good thing. It's a pain in a lot of people's neck to do that, to keep upgrading, but it shows that there is a lot of maturity and people are answering and solving the problems that are coming. So it's painful, but it's one of the growing pains, and I think it's a good thing.
I'll chime in just briefly here. I love the open source nature of the core of Backstage as well, because that means if there's a problem that we're experiencing or a feature gap that we want to see addressed, having that available to just file a pull request or an issue on GitHub, or reach out and ask for help in Discord, makes it a very easy platform to work with, despite it being relatively new, and more so than a proprietary hosted platform where you're subject to somebody's roadmap entirely and is less open for contribution.
What have you seen with Backstage that maybe we should be running like Kubernetes in the first place and then have that capability? Or does it not matter which platform that you're on, making the DevOps process easier? What tools do you think we need to have spun up in order to leverage the benefits of that? Maybe Brian, if you want to answer.
Yeah, this was part of the reason why we chose Backstage, although we didn't really seriously look at too many other options, was because it was a really natural fit with what we were already running at Shutterstock. So, we've had quite a few years of managing Kubernetes clusters, and we're a TypeScript, Node, React shop. So all of those things made it kind of a no-brainer as far as if we're going to manage this on our own. Those were things that weren't concerns. Now, as far as like, what are the other options for deployment? That's not something I'm super familiar with, as far as like, is it best to just plan on deploying this into Kubernetes, or can you do it other ways? I'm sure they have examples in the docs about how to do other types of deployments. Maybe the other folks on the panel could share other ways we might consider, that you might consider for deployment purposes. But again, for our purposes, it was just a natural fit. Kind of the default out of the box path was kind of what we were already using.
Yeah, same boat for us at Boeing.
I mean, you can deploy it anywhere you can deploy a Node application and point it to storage and your source code repository. I mean, but you should be running it on Kubernetes, right? I mean, Kubernetes came to solve all the problems that people had in the last 20 or so years, and you should be running Backstage or any other IDP on Kubernetes.
Yeah. I think this is something where things will be easier for you if you go where the community goes. And I come from a software delivery background, DevOps and all that. You can make anything an efficient system, any technology. You don't have to use Kubernetes, but all the tools are out there. All the systems are out there. You can just adopt things that exist. You don't have to rebuild anything, and then get all the best parts of Backstage along with that. So I think that's one of the advantages of just leaning to Kubernetes at this point. The tool chains are just out there now.
And you know what, in the spirit of an IDP, to find that efficiency and to find what other people are doing, that's, Manuel saying, go with what the community is doing. It runs very easily on Kubernetes. It has a scalability, it has a recoverability. And I think that's kind of building on top of the value you get from an IDP.
Yeah, anybody, Chad, do you want to mention anything to follow up on that front? I just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak on their thoughts.
Yeah, I'd already mentioned that we were in the same boat as Brian at Shutterstock. It already fit our current deployment pattern inside of Kubernetes. So um, to follow on to what Eddie said, you could use something else, but it was easier, straightforward, and most efficient for us to deploy into existing clusters.
Nice. So yeah, if you've already have DevOps set up for your deployment process, like Jenkins, Ansible, Argo, whatever you may be using, can Backstage then take over the management of those things, or do you have the current DevOps set up out the window and then replace that completely with Backstage? What does that look like?
In our setting, Backstage is just more providing a view into those existing systems. It's not really replacing Argo or Jenkins or anything like that, but it does have lots of different plugins for a lot of those different types of systems that can help developers find, okay, where's the Jenkins job for this application, or what's the current Argo CD view of the sync status, those sorts of things. You can pull those into Backstage so you can get a better view of those details. Eddie, go ahead. I talked over you.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. Right. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about IDPs and in general and Backstage in particular is that you can, once people start getting used to going there, you can put everything you need in there. And we've taken that. We've actually built several custom plugins and custom pages where teams can do deployments through our IDP. And in the same sense, Brian, they can see the status of their deployments through Argo directly into the IDP, correlated with the code in the same place as the source and the documentation. And it really starts adding up how much time is being saved, right? I can go and simply say, well, here's the source code. Let me look at the pull request. Oh, there's an outstanding pull request that I see in my IDP. I click the button. I can merge it. That kicks off a process. I can click another button, deploy it, and see the output. And then sprinkle on top of that, you can see how much it's costing by running FinOps directly in your IDP. So it really starts becoming that, I want to say it's like a Swiss Army knife, but because it's specialized tools, but all in one place. And there's got to be a better analogy than a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. The extensibility of it lets you kind of make it do whatever you want it to do. So if you have Jenkins or Spinnaker or some other pipeline, you can make it work with that. But most likely, there's a plugin out there already that supports those things. So even if you're not using Kubernetes and something else is driving your CI/CD, you can still have that surfaced. And I think most people use GitHub these days or something similar with an API. So all those PRs can be surfaced in Backstage, and you can kind of have one-stop experience for what you need to get code out the door.
Yeah, same here for us. Again, it's the consolidation of all that information for ease of developer ingestion, rather than having to go out and look at multiple tools and see the status of a given thing, as Eddie described with that workflow. Like that's a beautiful workflow to be able to see all in one place.
And one of the things that I like to mention, sorry, Rob, let me just go real quick. Nobody is looking at your software because of how good your CI/CD process is, or how good your, how efficiently you can merge pull requests. And so sometimes as developers, we get excited about the details and we get excited about solutioning things, but we get over it. We all used to think, building our own VM and naming it special Star Wars names was great. Then eventually they all became GUIDs when it became something that was processed. Same with Kubernetes. You don't need to worry about your cluster. It's just there. And then once the IDPs come in and they solve the rest of these problems, we could really focus on building some world-class software and giving our customers, whether internal or external, a lot more features a lot quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many positives, it seems like, out of IDP and Backstage and how those things have benefited your organization. Are there any gaps or anything you think that are missing that aren't there yet with these type of processes, like something that would make you even more satisfied with the whole process?
I'll hop in first with some of our desires. I guess the authentication piece, right? That's a paid plugin, which understand, right? Companies have to make their money from putting this in, and authentication and doing enterprise services is typically one of the ones that they go with. So it's kind of challenging to evaluate how useful it will be for us. Going into it knowing that. But again, I understand the rationale behind it. Documentation could always be better. And so, like as a developer, I'm pot calling the kettle black here, saying I wish the documentation were better, but also acknowledge it's open source, right? That's what we're here for in the open source community and the users to submit MRs back to increase or improve that documentation. How about others?
Yeah, what's missing? What would you think would make it perfect for you and your use cases?
Well, I wouldn't say there's any one thing that's really missing. I like that this is coming in on the heels of the new platform engineering movement, which is really DevOps at scale. And we're never going to find plugins for Backstage that cover 100% of what we need to do, because that's what makes us unique is some of our processes and then what we feel is important to have our platform engineering team solve and then expose to our developers. But what, documentation is always one thing that's missing. I think if there was a little bit better handling of the micro front ends, so we can build plugins a little bit better. I wish there was a better delivery model for new versions where maybe there's a base pre-compiled core, and then we can add on things instead of having to build the whole thing ourselves every time with all these plugins. Little things like that, but nothing really gets I would say a line in the sand.
Yeah, I think it's similar for me. It's many little things, no one major issue. I think in a year this will be a very different case, but our company that's been around for a long time, we have other systems of truth, and we're trying to bring that into the catalog. So trying to align these things and have an information architecture that makes sense in Backstage is a challenge, and maybe this is a documentation problem that we just don't have the right docs, and we're trying to figure out, what the best way to get these representations of data in front of developers is. So that's an interesting challenge with Backstage. I wish there was a clearer path to say, here's how you can model your information appropriately if you have existing service registries, things like that. And the other thing that's a big deal for us that I wish was easier in Backstage is we're Adobe. We have already a design language called Spectrum that we use everywhere. We want to make our implementation of Backstage to look like an Adobe product. So we're trying to do that lift now and kind of reskin it. And I wish that was a better out of the box experience to say, hey, you want to have your own flavor of Backstage. So maybe that's something that we can contribute back to the community too at some point. So if anybody wants an Adobe flavored Backstage, let me know. We can work on that.
Yeah, we haven't run up against any like huge roadblocks as far as feature gaps. The nature of Backstage being very even a lot of the core features are written as plugins, ensure that you can extend it where you need to. Of course, it would always be better if there were more plugins available. That's even become part of our discussions with other vendors. Like, do you have a plugin that will work with Backstage when we're considering onboarding onto some new system or service? Eddie mentioned FinOps in Backstage. That's something that the core functionality in Backstage is fairly bare bones, and you do need to then plug it in with your cloud platform or and pull in a lot of that data. That's not something that we've really bitten off yet. And I'll just take a moment. We're of the panel, Shutterstock is definitely the smallest, and we don't have a dedicated team that is owning our Backstage instance. But I feel like we have been successful at standing it up and using almost entirely inside the box functionality and having a compelling experience. It's not. I think sometimes folks are a little bit afraid of well, how much effort is this going to require to be useful at all? And who's the team that's going to spend 80% of the time working on this, and that's not been our experience. So even for a smaller company, without a dedicated team, if we had the benefit of, we were already using and very familiar with Kubernetes and TypeScript and React and that sort of thing. So there are benefits for us that might not apply to every company. But in our experience, it was still attainable and approachable.
I think we're contractually obligated to say it's missing Gen AI. So something with AI, right, to make it be able to get some funding from the executives, right?
Okay.
Yeah, definitely there with a great way to phrase that. So Danielle and Lisa, seems like we have a lot of questions from the audience, so maybe we can bring them here now and start answering some of those. Thank you.
The Gen AI question was our cue to jump in and say, okay, now you said the buzzword, let's get moving forward. Real quick, there's a question for Eddie just about if you could repeat what the cost tracking plugin that you mentioned is from VL, he just missed it.
So we rolled our own. We use KubeCost and OpenCost, and we harvest the information and put in our own plugin. So it's not a commercially available plugin, unfortunately.
Okay, got it. And then also for Brian, curious what Shutterstock used before Backstage, if anything.
We didn't have any IDP before Backstage. It was a mishmash of tools and spreadsheets laying all over the place. And you'd go to the Slack channel and ask, where can I find documentation on this or that? So that's been a huge bonus of having Backstage. It's kind of been our first tool that's provided a lot of that information.
I suspect you were not alone there with that scenario. Jerry is asking, did anyone consider Port as an alternative to Backstage?
We looked at Port, we looked at Cortex, and we looked at Backstage, and we decided to go with Backstage after doing the checks and the integration with what we had in GitHub and Kubernetes and so on.
Okay.
We have another question from Jim, who said, I'd be interested to hear about your use of the sound check plugin. We are about to deploy this ourselves.
We're using a Shutterstock fairly successfully. It's driving one of our we're doing a kind of a service level tiering initiative where we're categorizing our services and setting expectations for our tier 1 services, the ones that are most critical to our customers, for various security posture, infrastructure expectations, and we're using SoundCheck to drive a lot of that for checking how Kubernetes is configured, what's your observability setup look like, and making sure things are meeting those expectations. We've had a pretty good positive experience with it.
Awesome. Next question is by Mathis. How do you manage the staging process of an application registered as a component Backstage? Let me show.
Like from dev to test to prod. Yeah.
I could start off. So in our case, we actually have dev, QA, and prod environments and implementations of all of this. So we follow standard Git flow, and we semantically version our. So we build the IDP with our plugins, with additional any other components, any updates, and we try to do that at least monthly to keep up with all the changes. So what we do is we did a lot of manual testing in the lower environments. We're upgrading to use Test Cube with Playwright to do it. There is some fun with getting the cookie and the authentication going because you have different roles to do different things. But right now it's kind of a team effort, and because it's internal tool, the bar isn't as high as it would be for any of our customer facing things. So things go bump, we have a Slack channel dedicated, we have Jira tickets, people tell us really quickly, and we can roll back very quickly, thanks to Kubernetes.
Maybe anyone, Manuel, how do you manage that process?
Yeah, it's actually a little complex for us because contributors come from all over the company. We ask people to bring their portals into Backstage. But what we do is have essentially an ephemeral environment for every PR. So you make your PR, you say provision ephemeral, and you get your own instance of Backstage where you can test everything and share with product to review, whoever else to review. And then we do have a pre-prod environment that's really just like a stopping point, and then go straight to prod after that. So it's pretty lean. What we have to do still, we have tests and we're using Playwright. We're trying to expand that and just go deeper into it and do more of an integration test and smoke test in these ephemeral environments so you can really validate that your changes are safe. But we do kind of go from ephemeral straight to prod almost with one stop on the way.
Wow. Okay. I suspect there's very different ways to do this. Does anyone else have one that's dramatically different than what's already been mentioned? Everybody okay with that? Okay.
All right.
Next question.
So next question, I'll show it here. Is it possible to share how some of you rolled out your IDPs and how you got your internal dev community to engage and adopt it? I feel like that is a lot of a question. Big question.
Yeah, I can take a quick stab at this. We started our journey a while ago because it was with the move to containers. But it was very opinionated at first. If you wanted to get your container into a cloud and get it out the door, we would tell you exactly how to do that specific thing. And we got a lot of adoption out of it, and we got a lot of growth out of it. We just did one thing really well, and then over time we kind of expanded from there. And then eventually we did get like a mandate to use our platform. But it took a lot of organic growth and a lot of like marketing inside the company to actually get to that point and really just pushing one very opinionated workflow for the first like year or two.
I feel like that, so in the cloud native maturity model, we talk a lot about culture and bringing people and the people side of all of this change and, platforms and all of that. And that it is so important to take people along and not just come in and say, do this, but like explain why, know that it's a journey. Anyone else want to add to that?
I'll chime in just briefly here too. I think it takes a combination of that top-down mandate and the bottom-up cultural organic growth, because you're not going to get 100% from either end. So that was our experience. We provided tools and said, basically, look, this is useful. Don't you think it's useful? Please try and use it. And then there was also some leadership saying here's where we're going to register ownership of services. In our case, that was kind of the primary use case. So if you have a service running in production, it has to be in Backstage, and then some of those things start getting baked into our standard CI/CD pipelines and that sort of thing to try to drive that. But ultimately, everybody needs to find it useful, and that's where determining what the key use cases for your company. What challenges are you facing that are really important and that Backstage or another IDP can address? That's where you're going to get real good engagement over a long term.
Now, we have two particular ones. So following up with Darren, I think is a similar question. We use the templating and the documentation were the first two big hooks. They were probably the most the thing that brought in people the most. We have a whole bunch of other stuff, but when they come in and they want to do something that was traditionally complicated, and now you've got a 3-click wizard to do it. That was one of the initial hooks. And then having the very rich technical documentation, and we've added things like lucid charts and videos and slides and all these other capabilities into it. Teams are able to really show off their work and create really nice technical docs that were indexed and searchable. So those were kind of the two big hooks, and then we kind of kept them there with all the other tools that we built.
Okay. There's a question from Martin, which we can maybe try to briefly take. This is a very big question. It's kind of in the, and there's a whole panel on this later. But it's sort of like if you build it, they will come. Well, once they come, then how do you get them excited about using it? And then how do you kind of keep them excited over time? Let's just have one person answer this, and then we'll wrap up with another short question after. But I just want to tell the audience here, this is a very big question, and there's a very big panel who will definitely address this later. But does anyone want to just give a quick answer to this?
I mean, I can keep talking, never shut up if you let me. But
Go for
I
it.
would say you got to continuously improve it, right? In the same spirit of the IDP, continually improving your process, you need to continually improve your tools, right? We started with wizards and documentation, and we moved to FinOps and status of your deploys, and then you add things like deployment capabilities, and you add automated ADRs, and you add have to keep adding things to keep it interesting too, because your point, the next cool thing's going to come up, and you know, it's your IDP is going to be another legacy stack and burden. So treat it like a product, just like any product, you know, that you're putting out to customers. It needs to continually evolve, and once it stagnates, it'll go away. So just treat it like a product would be my recommendation.
Okay, I think we're going to end with one. We're getting a little bit behind, but I think this is a great question to end on. And then I also want to say, if y'all can jump in, and there a lot more questions came in right now, last minute. So I know that the panelists can stick around and answer questions in the chat. But let's just wrap with this. Like, basically, if you're just starting to adopt Backstage, you know, what are the first 3 things that are going to deliver the highest value? Initially, where should people focus on to get started?
I think I'm going to roll down on what Eddie said just real quick, because I think catalog and tech docs are probably the big things, like making it discoverable and easy to find, and that's your hook, and then everything else can kind of come after that. Sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I would emphasize catalog, because a lot of what Backstage provides hangs off of something that exists in the catalog, and so starting with other pieces doesn't make a lot of sense. That was our experience, you know, starting with getting users and teams represented in Backstage, as well as the applications that they own.
Ditto here for us.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank all of you for being here. It was so great, so insightful. Please come back and chat, answer some of the questions for everyone. Thank you so much. With that, I am going to
and thank you, Rob, for moderating this panel. Great job for being a Cube Crash alum. Appreciate you coming back and joining us again. I hope you'll continue to join us on future Cube Crashes, and great job moderating this panel. So we're gonna move everybody off. Thank you, great panel. Stick around in the chat. Keep answering all the questions. Thank you for all the Cube Crash alums. Eddie's also a Cube Crash alum, and for the first timers.